thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to join Sean and Bridget and all of you for this, I think, very important discussion. I shall try to keep my presentation short because we're running behind time. There are all sorts of names for it, and so long as we're all talking about the same thing, that's fine. Citizens' income, basic income, universal basic income. Citizens' basic income is now becoming popular in the UK, and it doesn't matter what you call it, it is an unconditional, non-withdrawable income for every individual as a right of citizenship. Unconditional means that it really is unconditional. It will change with your age, but with nothing else. It's non-withdrawable. If your earnings or your wealth rise, it's not withdrawn. It's for each individual, not each household, and it's a right of citizenship. There are a lot of arguments for it. I will not go through all of them now. If you want to know 101 reasons, then you must buy my book. So when I wrote that book, I got a list actually much longer than 101. I had to cut some out, and I've been regretting that ever since, because people say, well, here's an argument for it. I said, yeah, I had to cut it out. Here's just a few of the arguments. I'm not going to go through very many. It will provide us with a solid floor of economic security for the first time on which we could all build. It wouldn't be withdrawn. And so some people would no longer be on means-tested benefits, some people might be, but everybody would be a lot nearer to getting off them, and net income would rise faster as earned income rose, so which would create additional incentive to seek employment, to create self-employment, to increase earnings, to take on new skills, and so on. Cohabitation, civil partnership, and marriage would be neither subsidised nor penalised. I don't know about the Republic of Ireland. I got into this debate many years ago, well, too many years ago to think about, 40 years ago, because I was administering means-tested benefits in the UK. And the worst part of our job was having to ask intimate questions of people's relationships, because if you were living as a couple, you got less means-tested benefits than if you were living apart as two separate individuals. So each individual would receive their own citizen's income. It's a really important aspect of citizen's income. Members of a family would be free to work out together the employment pattern that they wanted. The employment market would become a lot more efficient, and people would have much more choice about how they approached it. A few more of the arguments: administrative simplicity, automatic and flawless computerisation. Anybody who's been anywhere near the computerisation problems that governments have had with benefit systems will know how important that is. There'll be no stigma, little fraud, few errors, transparency, additional social cohesion, and flexicurity. If you haven't come across that word before, it means a flexible labour market alongside income security. It's what we don't have now in any developed country. Paying for it. Assumptions that I'm making in this paper, and I make in the paper in the book, are that in the short term, a revenue-neutral citizen's income would probably be required. That is, we can't assume at the moment that there will be any additional public funds. That means that income tax personal allowances would be reduced, tax rates would be raised slightly, changes would be made to national insurance contributions. This is the British system. I don't know the Irish system in detail. Any equivalent social insurance scheme would have to be adapted slightly, and you'd see income tax allowances and rates changed. In the longer term, we very much hope that additional funding mechanisms would be possible. This message is quite important. Is a citizen's income desirable? And my view is yes. I've given you some of the arguments for that, and there's 101 reasons for it being desirable. If it's not desirable, it's not feasible. But let's suppose it is desirable. The question then is it feasible? And the arguments I'm going to make are dealt with in full, as Sean says, in a new book, Feasibility of Citizens' Income, published by Paul Grave Macmillan. If you can't afford it, and you probably can't, then please ask a library to get it for you. I'm sorry about the price, it's not my fault. There are many different kinds of feasibility, and it's important to deal with them all separately. You can't simply say, is it feasible? There are many kinds of feasibility. First of all, there are two different financial feasibilities. One, would it be possible to finance a citizen's income? Two, would implementation impose significant financial losses on any households or individuals? They are both important. Psychological, is the idea readily understood and understood to be beneficial? Behavioural, would a citizen's income deliver the benefits promised for it? Administrative, would it be possible to administer a citizen's income? And separately, would it be possible to administer the transition? Political, would the idea cohere with existing political ideologies and policy process? That is it possible to get the idea from just an idea through to implementation? Each of those feasibilities needs to be proved before we can say citizens' income is feasible. I'm going to briefly look at some of those in a bit more detail. Here are some figures for the United Kingdom, and this has been work done at the University of Essex, and I'll give you the reference later on. Here are two separate schemes. Scheme A abolishes means-tested benefits, and you'll see why that's significant in a minute. Scheme B leaves our means-tested benefit system in place and recalculates people's means-tested benefits on the basis of their citizens' incomes. That is, their means-tested benefits will generally be reduced because they are now receiving means-tested benefits. And a lot of people would therefore come off means-tested benefits, and I'll show you some of the figures in a minute. Here are some of the details. You don't need to remember these or necessarily get them all in detail in your heads now. But what it shows is that for this particular scheme, which gives a £60 per individual citizen's income to working age adults and different amounts to other groups, and leaves the existing benefit system in place in Scheme B. Scheme A, it abolishes the existing scheme and provides those figures of means-tested benefits, where the income tax rate has to rise by 5%. The important figures are at the bottom of that table. On the left-hand side, Scheme A, which abolishes the means-tested benefits system, there are very high losses experienced by low-income households at the point of implementation. That scheme is not feasible in relation to the second kind of financial feasibility. Scheme B, on the right, has very low losses for low-income households. That scheme is feasible. They are both feasible in terms of the first kind of financial feasibility, that is, it's possible to afford them by simply adjusting the current tax and benefits system. Some of the effects of Scheme B, I'm now forgetting Scheme A because it's clearly not feasible in relation to the second kind of financial feasibility. Scheme B, it shows you that, I'm not going to go through all the details, but it shows you that quite a lot of households end up not on means-tested benefits because they are now receiving their citizens' incomes. They are simply floated off them. There are some households still on means-tested benefits. It's the only way they can be protected at the point of implementation. Here are some significant results related to what is a fairly minor, in some ways, citizens' income scheme. Inequality would be reduced, child poverty would be reduced, working age adults in poverty would be reduced, and economically active working age adults in poverty would be reduced. There's a slight increase in elderly poverty. That's partly because we perhaps mistakenly reduced their tax allowance and shouldn't have done. We're dealing with that one. Here's some possible implementation methods for financial feasibility. So we're probably going to have to leave in place the means-tested system. And then we hope that one day there'll be some additional money available, and so the means-tested system will slowly wither. That's the ideal. Now, a different feasibility, psychological feasibility. We all have a lot of embedded presuppositions in our heads, and Sean has been through some of them already this morning, so I shan't go into any of them. You know them, because all of us live with them. Now, it's all very well us reasoning with individuals who offered these objections to us, but it is still true that this is the way our minds work. And in the UK, I don't know about Ireland, but in the UK, we've been we've been means testing benefits for 400 years. And that means that psychological feasibility is a test that's going to be very difficult to get through. However, it is true that minorities can convert majorities. In the UK, we have seen that you've seen a particular interesting example in the Republic of Ireland, where a minority, and you wouldn't have expected such a massive social change to occur, and I've been watching with interest how same-gender marriage has taken off in the Republic of Ireland. 15 years ago, you wouldn't have said that was possible. And we've seen similar transition in the UK. And so minorities, yes, can convert majorities, and public opinion can change. It is probably true that until we've got some more unconditional benefits, we're not going to be able to persuade people that unconditional benefits are a good idea. And once a shift has started, you can sometimes propel it along. But you'll find details on that in the book, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Administration of existing universal benefits is incredibly simple, and it works. In the UK, we have a universal child benefit. It is still unconditional. If anybody wants to know the real story behind the attempt to means test it, then talk to me afterwards. I won't deal with it now. It is still an unconditional benefit. Behavioural feasibility is perhaps more difficult. Some of the it's a bit like the Old Testament when you were told that a prophet was a true prophet if what they'd said came true. Now, actually, by then it's a bit late. We've got a serious problem with behavioural feasibility with the citizen's income, because until you've done it, you can't say to people, look, it worked. So behavioural feasibility is a really difficult test to get it through. One of the only ways the only way of doing it that I know of is to implement a citizen's income for an age group and then see if that works and then move on from that. And I'll come to that again in a moment. You have to implement it to prove it. Political feasibility. This is all very nation-specific. And it's some research I did at the London School of Economics studies the political ideologies of a variety of our own political parties in the UK and of members of those political parties in the past and in the present, and says those political ideologies, can they generate arguments for citizens' income? Do they generate arguments against? Do individuals in those parties offer arguments for citizens' income? Do members of those parties offer arguments against? And are those arguments intimately connected with the political ideologies? Political feasibility is a very complex picture. You can only answer it in your own context. What I did discover in the UK, and it may or may not be true in the Republic, is that the arguments for a citizen's income generally relate to the political ideology of the party concerned. The arguments against the citizen's income that we find expressed in those parties and by those parties' members are generally generic in the sense that they are not related to the ideologies but are attached to the kinds of objections that Sean mentioned earlier on. That is, they are not political arguments. Policy process. Again, this is a very nation-specific issue. Policy processes are incredibly complicated. You've got to get something from idea to implementation through a very complex system of individuals and institutions. It is not easy, and many good ideas never make it. And so you've got to look at issues such as policy networks and communities, including the media, institutional relationships, think tanks, government, parliament, civil service, self-interested players, and amongst those particularly now in relation to the benefits field are the manufacturers of computers and their software. And you have to ask whether incremental implementation is possible, because in many policy processes that is actually how it works. If you can't do something incrementally, then a policy process can't cope with it. You also have to look at current government priorities and recognise the next year they might be different. I won't go through all this, I'm running out of time. Read the book, read the book. You'll have to read the book. So, we have a variety of different feasibilities, and the citizen's income you need to prove all of them if you're going to implement a citizen's income. There are some feasibility tests have to be passed before you can start. Political, administrative, policy process, and the two different kinds of financial feasibility have to be proved before you can start implementing a citizen's income. And if you then manage to pass those for a particular deserving demographic group, then you might be able to get yourself through the psychological feasibility test. That's the really difficult one. Can the public as a whole recognise that giving an unconditional income to a demographic group is the right thing to do? The most difficult group to tackle is going to be working age adults. That's where a lot of the prejudiced arguments that Sean mentioned earlier, they really have their force, and they are very difficult to defeat. Even if you can defeat them rationally, defeating them psychologically is the really difficult issue. And so it may well be that we need to start with what the public understands to be a deserving demographic group, which will tend to be elderly people. It will be often the pre-retired, who get a lot of public sympathy, for people know that it's quite difficult for people who lose their jobs when they are not quite retirement age to find another job. And younger adults whose income maintenance is a mess in the UK, I imagine it is in Republic of Ireland as well, is another possibly deserving group. Psychological and behavioural feasibilities can then follow and lay the foundation for an unconditional non-withdrawable benefit for another demographic group. And you'll see the argument in the book if you want to read it in detail. This rather suggests that the citizen's basic income is going to need to be implemented one demographic group at a time. That tackling the entire population in one go is not going to be a starter. And there's the possible groups that you have a go at. Now, these are genuine citizens' incomes. They are unconditional, they are non-withdrawable, they are for individuals. The fact that you're only tackling one age group doesn't compromise the fact that these are genuine citizens' incomes, because there is one conditionality over which you have absolutely no control, and that is your age. Well, you don't, do you? You can't affect your age. So in one sense, it's not a conditionality at all. And so it is not you're not compromising the citizen's income. Policy accidents. There's an interesting, I wasn't going to write this in the book, but I ended up having to because I noticed that there were so many scattered across the history of social policy change in the UK. Policy accidents happen. We ended up with family allowances, which was the precursor to child benefit in the UK, because one person wrote a book, one person was converted by it, that person ended up as the chair of a committee, they put the issue on the agenda of the committee, which they shouldn't have done, it got into the report, Parliament had to debate it. Members of Parliament had different reasons for voting for it, and didn't want the other side to know what those were, and so there was almost no debate, and it passed. We ended up with family allowances, unconditional family allowances after the Second World War, through a policy accident. These things do occur. You can't, unfortunately, you can't predict them, and you can't plan for them. Further reading, if you're interested, Money for Everyone is a general introduction to the citizens' income concept and debate. I've mentioned 101 Reasons before. That's the new one, the feasibility of citizens' income. That's another new one. So if you're interested in that, Citizens' Basic Income, Christian Social Policy. And that's the most recent financial feasibility research. We do this at the Institute for Social and Economic Research at the University of Essex using the Euromod microsimulation programme. One of the really difficult issues that we might face in the UK over Brexit is that this is an EU-funded programme. And to what extent the UK will still have access to this after that, we have no idea. But it's enormously useful now. And there's an introductory booklet you can download from our website if you're interested. That's it. So there we are. My conclusion is that a citizen's basic income is feasible if you implement it in a particular way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Malcolm. And we have time for a quick question or two. We have a roving microphone there. Just a quick thing, Malcolm mentioned the UK benefit system, and I think anybody, if you go and watch any movie at all this year, make sure it's
watch
Daniel Blake. I mean, that is an eye-opener, quite amazing.
As you watch Daniel Blake, if you haven't already, ask yourself, what difference would it have made if that family with 2 children and that man not far from retirement age were receiving a citizen's income? I mean, just look at that film and make that decision for yourself.
Okay, yes, we've lady, and if you could just identify yourself too, please.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. My name is Derval Brennan. I'm a policy researcher with the Southern Regional Assembly based in Waterford. I suppose I'm curious, I've got a question for you, Malcolm, but it's also, I suppose, directed at Sean or anybody else who might want to take up the cudgels on it. When you were speaking about policy process and, I suppose, trying to effect change through policy networks, because of, I suppose, the resistance or the inertia that's built into systems as it is. I'm just curious, in terms of, I don't know the profile of the attendees here. I don't know how many are key influencers. Sean referred in his introduction to, I suppose, the influence that lobby groups such as the, business representatives can have, and I suppose the part that media has to play in that. But how do those who may have a receptivity towards, basic income or citizen income really reach those key influencers and make those effective changes if they themselves are not coming to the table to even, I suppose, debate and understand it? Now, that's not presuming that there's not people here who are open to that, but I'm just curious because it doesn't seem to be the one that's championed in the media per se. Thank you.
Just before you address that, Malcolm, I'll just check if there is anyone else, just in terms of time. We'll just take 2 of them together, if that's okay. Yes, with somebody here. Yeah, just get the microphone to you.
Hi there, my name's Ciara Flanagan. I'm with Pubble. I just have 2 questions. The first one, you mentioned when you were talking about the policy process, you made a brief mention to high-tech companies, I think, and I'd just be quite interested in learning a bit about what you meant there. And then you mentioned administrative simplicity, and with Scheme A and Scheme B, I was wondering what would happen in terms of administrative simplicity if you're doing it with using the means-tested approach, how that would affect administration.
Yeah,
thanks.
Certainly. I'll deal with that one first because it's the detailed question. When benefit systems are changed now in the UK, then computerisation is always part of the policy process because this has particularly been the case with the universal credit change, if anybody knows about that little disaster. And so computer companies tend to get involved quite early on in the process, which means that because if you can't computerise it, then you don't do it. And so we've ended up in a situation where those who write the software and produce the hardware are having a considerable influence on policy. Because, of course, they will say, well, we can't computerise that, so you can't do that. Or they will say, hey, we can do it like this, why don't you do it like this? So you do get far too much influence now. We've seen this over computerisation projects in the health service and in benefit systems. This relates to the second part of your question. The administration of child benefit, which is an unconditional benefit for every child in the UK, which goes to their main carer, is so easy. And when I was administering means-tested benefits, it was our favourite benefit because you could completely predict it. Its computerisation never went wrong. You plug it in when the child's born, and you turn it off when they get to the relevant age, and it just kept on coming. And the same would be true of citizens' income, even if you keep the present system in place. the administration of a new citizen's income on top of it would be just so easy that it really wouldn't matter. Again, you turn it on at a particular age, you turn it off at a particular age. And so it wouldn't, although it looks as if it would add to complexity, in practice it doesn't. Then because it would take quite a lot of households off, and you can see the figures in the research, that's a relatively small citizen's income, it would actually increase the simplicity, even if you left that system in place. So that's the answer to that one. In terms of influences, I'll tell you the approach of the Citizens' Income Trust, because it may be of interest. We have no resources, we have no paid staff, we have no money. We haven't had. So what we've always tried to do is do what we can do. And that's the only answer to the question. Because you don't know who's going to be an influencer next year. And somebody who is a considerable influencer now, 2 years down the road, they might not be. And somebody who has no influence at all at the moment, you might find that in a year's time, they're in a strategic position. So all we've ever done is relate to whoever we can. We are an educational charitable trust, and our task is to facilitate debate and put research results out there. And the more of that happens, the more intelligent the debate will be, and the more people will want to relate to it. So these things, they are connected together. And so all I can say to anybody who has an interest in the basic income debate here in the Republic of Ireland is, in one sense, there's no point in worrying too much about the policy process, because you can't control it. And all you can do is do what you can, as much as you can of what you can.